During the entrance exam, Ronan is told to demonstrate his technique on a magically engineered dummy. Ronan casually looks at it and says aloud that it is simple and he will only need a single sword strike. Of course, this causes the other professors to mock him for various reasons. First, his shabby appearance makes him look like a poor commoner from the countryside. Second, although his target is only a dummy, its defenses are so strong that even the future sword saint and the genius of the capital failed to leave a scratch on it. However, Ronan is different. In his previous life, he was a god and giant slayer, so naturally, one strike is all it takes to sever the head of the supposedly indestructible dummy. The professors who mocked him are left completely speechless as the dummy's head falls to the ground. We begin the story by shifting to our protagonist's past. Ronan is a common soldier, and during the battle against the giants, many of his comrades die. The winged celestial being before him is called the giant Ahayut. Ronan explains that 3 of them suddenly appeared 20 days ago and began causing havoc across the empire. Because of this, half of the empire has been turned into a burial ground. Thankfully, this one is the last to be slain. One of the giants was scorched by a dragon, while the other was sealed for eternity by a mage. Ronan is clearly saying this to make the giant furious. Contrary to his expectations, however, the giant responds calmly, noting that he can sense his brethren and that they died alongside their opponents. Our protagonist's attempt to rage bait the giant ends in complete failure. The giant can already tell that both of them will eventually die because of this skirmish. Still, he admits that if Ronan had more time to master and sharpen his skills, the outcome would have definitely been against the giants. Now it is our protagonist who becomes furious because of the giant's words. The giant acknowledges Ronan's strength, but still declares that this is the end of his world, right before getting his head cleanly severed by our protagonist. With that, Ronan walks away while reflecting on the giant's words. Just days ago, he was casually chatting and enjoying his time with his comrades, but now they are all dead. His comrades and friends were brave to the point of seeming foolish. Despite knowing they could not win, they still chose to fight rather than retreat. This is when our protagonist reveals something puzzling. He does not understand why his sword worked against the giant, when even the Empire's strongest swordmaster's aura was easily deflected. Now we understand why a common soldier like him was deployed to the front lines. Still, Ronan can feel his consciousness slowly drifting away. However, a sudden call for help snaps him back to reality. Our protagonist forcefully drags himself toward the sound of the voice. Upon reaching the source, Ronan is surprised to find that the person is still alive, although she is in terrible shape. Even so, she still remains sharp. This baddie is our protagonist's Grand Commander, Adeshon. Seeing her in such a state, our protagonist makes a light remark about it, to which she responds with a polite jabs, insisting our boy should look at himself instead. Becoming a bit serious, Adeshon asks about the giant. Ronan responds by telling her that he killed it himself. Our protagonist is slightly caught off guard as he watches the Grand Commander burst into tears while thanking him. This gives him an idea. As Adeshon listens, our protagonist decides to make a request since she is grateful to him. Well, common soldiers like himself are usually discarded and burned, so he hopes the bodies of his comrades will be treated with respect this time. Adeshon expresses that she might not last long enough to carry out his request, so she insists he should do it himself instead. However, that is when our protagonist begins coughing violently. Well, it is obvious he is a walking corpse and could potentially die at any moment. During the conversation, Adeshon senses the grief in his tone and asks what he plans to do if he survives. Our protagonist admits he has a lot on his mind, but he would really like to attend the academy. This is because what the giant said about developing his skills in time keeps eating at him. In addition, it was one of the wishes of his dead sister, but it obviously does not matter since he could rejoin her at any moment. Hearing this, Adeshon tries to encourage him, but our protagonist simply tells her that he is a lost cause. Deep in his eyes, we can see his regret. But in the next moment, both of them are shocked, because the storm suddenly vanishes and the rain stops. And what follows next is the ground vibrating violently. Suddenly, before them, an 8-winged giant appears in the sky, accompanied by several other giants. Ronan sees this and wonders aloud where they suddenly came from. Adeshon wears the same expression as well. Shockingly enough, she is a regressor, and this is her 3rd attempt, yet she still failed to save the world. Just then, our protagonist's furious shout snaps her out of her thoughts. Ronan insists she pulls herself together and send him up with her magic because he cannot reach them from down here. Our protagonist is obviously a dead man, yet even so, he refuses to go down without a fight and is ready to take down as many bastards as possible. Adeshan watches our protagonist closely and realizes he is the only reason she made it this far in this regression, so she immediately makes up her mind. She calls out to Ronan, and before he can react, she pulls him close and kisses him while using it as a means to pass him a blue magic orb. Our protagonist swallows it and immediately asks what she just gave him. However, Adeshan ignores his questions and begins giving him instructions instead. Ronan does not understand and insists she should at least tell him why she chose him. In response, she tells our protagonist that when he goes back in time and they eventually meet again, he should make sure she does not do anything stupid and instead becomes a tailor. Just like our protagonist once mentioned, she too has a lot of things she wants to do. And just like that, both of them are killed by the giant attack. The magic orb then begins to work its magic, and in the very next second, our protagonist opens his eyes to a beautiful scenery. Just like that, Ronan is sent back to his hometown, Nimbutan, leaving him completely shocked, as he has officially been sent back to the past. Meanwhile, our protagonist takes a moment to gather his thoughts. After the Grand Commander kissed him, she explains that what she just gave him is a magic orb capable of turning back time. This is how someone like her, who was once a simple tailor, managed to become the Grand Commander. However, the magic orb only has 4 usages, and she has already used 3 of them. So now she is giving our protagonist her final chance. We already know Ronan's sword was the only thing that worked against that giant. So what she wants him to do is sharpen his skills. From their earlier conversation, she could tell he had the desire and drive to become stronger. This is why she insists he head to the Imperial Academy, because it will definitely help our protagonist grow stronger. Ronan's flashback ends with the Grand Commander insisting that our protagonist make sure she becomes a tailor again. Back in the present, everything feels real to our protagonist. Still, he refuses to believe it and hopes he might just be dreaming. But then again, if he really has been sent back to the past, it means he can see his elder sister again. In the next scene, Ronan can be seen running through the crowded streets. He is obviously excited, but then something catches his attention. He spots a group of guys bullying someone. Our protagonist decides to ignore them at first, thinking that some things never change. However, something else catches his attention. The boy being held upside down on the tree is not tied with a rope, but with magic. Our protagonist points out that magic users like this are valuable on the battlefield, and he never expected one to appear in his hometown. Meanwhile, the guy with the girlish face is anxious because, at the rate things are going, something bad is definitely going to happen. The boy being held upside down insists he doesn't have any money because his mother's treatment this month was expensive. In response, the gang leader reveals that he doesn't care about his mother's health before starting to beat the boy out of anger. Turning to the red-haired boy, the gang leader orders him to lift the boy even higher to the top of the tree. However, the boy tries to explain that he can't because he's afraid an accident might happen. This makes the leader furious as he tells Azel to shut up and do as he's told if he doesn't want to end up the same way. Azel begins to wonder how things ended up like this. The only reason he learned magic was to help people. He desperately wants to refuse, but the poor guy is far too scared. This is when our protagonist enters, smacking the back of Azel's head with a stick while insisting he stop. As a result, the magic is released, and the boy collapses to the ground. The group leader immediately becomes furious on the spot, but Azel quickly tries to explain that he didn't do it on purpose. Ronan speaks up, insisting the guy shouldn't worry about trash like the blonde idiot. Our protagonist reveals that he wants to ask him some questions while completely ignoring the blonde guy's tantrums. First, our protagonist asks how Azel managed to learn telekinesis. He explains that he taught himself using a grimoire he bought. Our protagonist is impressed and surprised that the guy managed to learn magic despite using such a cheap grimoire. Anyways, his thoughts are interrupted by the blonde guy, who finally snaps after being continuously ignored by our protagonist. It turns out he once lost to our protagonist, and he believes this is the reason Ronan is acting up. And so, he charges at Ronan with his sword. Our protagonist calmly analyzes the guy. His posture and swordsmanship is terrible, but because he's naturally strong, that's the only reason he's feared around here. But to everyone's surprise, our protagonist easily dodges the attack. The blonde guy can't believe he missed. Meanwhile, our protagonist thinks to himself that his younger body is just as he expected. Combined with his experience, our boy refers to this as battle sense. Seeing this, the guy tries to play it off as luck. Our protagonist replies that for someone as unlucky as himself, he indeed feels lucky today. The blonde guy fails to understand the hint and instead insists our protagonist kneel and beg for his life, before adding that he'll only leave here with one arm. However, the fool crosses the line when he mentions our protagonist's sister. When our protagonist asks what he just said about his sister, the fool shamelessly admits she has a killer body and says she makes him horny. Ronan moves immediately without hesitation. The blonde guy's ear is severed on the spot. The guy instantly screams in pain while his subordinates are left in complete shock. Meanwhile, Ronan approaches him with a darkened expression, asking if the bastard wishes to die. The bullies are still wearing shocked expressions, not because our protagonist cuts off their boss's ear, but because he does it using only a tree branch. Ronan turns his attention to them, kicking their boss around like trash. He insists they take him away before they end up like him. However, they should leave behind the money they stole and also compensate him for ruining his mood. Later, our protagonist hands a sack of gold coins to the bullied boy. The boy tries to point out that the money is far more than what the bully took and that he can't accept it, but Ronan refuses, noting that the boss's sword alone is enough payment for him. Hearing this, the boy thanks our protagonist. However, both boys notice Azel is still standing there, obviously wanting to say something. Azel manages to mutter an apology. The boy breaks down, noting that he wanted to refuse, but he was so scared that he couldn't do anything. Both of them watch as he continues apologizing profusely. Anyways, the bullied kid notes that Azel's reaction is exactly the same as when he was first brought there. He says he saw Azel crying when the bully and his group dragged him over. What he is trying to say is that he understands Azel's situation, adding that both of them couldn't do anything to stop the bully. So the boy shouldn't feel like the entire thing was his fault. Before leaving, he adds that he truly appreciates Azel's apology. Now both Ronan and Azel watch him leave. Meanwhile, our protagonist observes Azel closely. He smirks, thinking the boy isn't bad after all. Ronan then asks if he remembers what they discussed. When Azel responds positively, Ronan insists they meet there again 4 days from now. However, it seems that wasn't part of the conversation, leading Azel to express confusion, causing Ronan to resort to threats if he doesn't show up on time. Azel watches our protagonist leave while understanding absolutely nothing. The next scene takes us to our protagonist's house. He stands in front of the door for a long time, knowing how much his sister loves flowers. He becomes embarrassed and is in the process of throwing them away when his elder sister suddenly appears. Iril is surprised that the person standing motionless at the door for so long is her little brother. Our protagonist freezes the moment he sees his sister. For a long time, he has imagined what he would say after returning, especially after leaving her behind without a word. His sister is a 10, and let's hope our protagonist doesn't come after us. Anyways, our protagonist softly announces his return. Inside, Iril is happy to receive flowers from a cold little brother like him. The girl really can't hide her excitement, making our protagonist wonder if she is overreacting. She offers to give our protagonist more food, but he insists he is full. She is a bit surprised when our protagonist asks her age, to which she replies that she is 22, before warning him playfully that he shouldn't forget things like that. During the conversation, our protagonist remains silent. He thinks that if his sister is 22, then it will still take 10 years before the giants invade the world. However, Iril mistakes his silence as him being sick. Ronan notes that his sister is the same as ever, kind, caring, and warm. This only makes him want to protect her even more. With that in mind, our protagonist informs her about his plans. When he tells her that he is considering enrolling in the academy, Iril's mind takes a moment to process what he just said. Then her eyes sparkle with excitement as she asks if he is serious. She immediately runs off, turning the cabinet upside down. She explains that she has always believed this day would come. Then she reveals a large pot. The pot is filled with gold coins, and she explains that she has secretly been saving money while waiting for the day he would decide to attend the academy. Our protagonist appreciates his sister's hard work, but explains that unfortunately, the money won't be enough, leaving her stunned. This is because our protagonist wants to attend the Imperial Academy, Philion Academy. Iril immediately becomes speechless upon hearing this before screaming in disbelief. Our protagonist explains that the Imperial Academy is the Empire's leading educational institution. Not only does it have outstanding professors and receive massive funding from the Imperial family, but it is also known as the very factory that produces heroes. Figures like Schlieffen, the Grand Commander, and many other legendary individuals were all products of the Academy. The reason Ronan knows this is because a Deshan once told him about it, explaining how those people played crucial roles during the war against the Giants. However, entering the Academy comes with two major problems. First, the standards are unbelievably high. Second, the entrance fees are so expensive that the Academy is practically reserved for nobles and elites of society. So now it makes sense why Ronan's sister was hesitant at first, though she still expressed her support for him. Eventually, Ronan arrives at the meeting location with Azel. Ronan expresses mild surprise that the boy actually showed up. In response, Azel explains that he didn't dare disobey after being threatened by our protagonist earlier, only for Ronan to casually reply that he had merely been joking. Before anything else, however, Ronan tells him that he wants to test something. Azel immediately looks confused. Ronan then suggests that Azel use his telekinesis on him and lift him as high as possible. The boy is stunned and quickly points out how dangerous that sounds, but Ronan remains completely confident, insisting that he will be fine. After Ronan repeatedly reassures him, Azel finally agrees to give it a try. He immediately begins chanting and casts the spell, causing blue mana to surround Ronan. Just like that, our protagonist is lifted into the air while he inwardly comments on how familiar the sensation feels. He admits that Azel's telekinesis lacks both height and stability, but the feeling is exactly the same as it did in his previous life. Ronan then reveals that the only reason he was able to battle Ahayut in the future was because of telekinesis, and telekinesis just so happens to be an incredibly rare ability among mages who are already rare themselves. In other words, Azel has just become an extremely important piece in Ronan's plans to fight against the Giants. Meanwhile, Azel informs him that he is struggling to maintain the spell. Hearing this, Ronan insists that he hold on a little longer because he wants to try something. The boy is left completely stunned when Ronan announces that he plans to come down by himself. With a single sword strike, our protagonist severs Azel's magic and lands safely on the ground. This immediately causes Azel to ask how he did it, but Ronan casually brushes it off as nothing more than an acrobatic landing. When Azel tries to clarify that he was actually asking about Ronan cutting through his mana, our protagonist immediately smacks him on the head. Well, the truth is that Ronan himself does not fully understand the answer either. Even so, he believes it is something that could eventually be figured out with enough research. However, one thing is certain. This ability may very well be one of the main reasons his sword were effective against the Giants in the first place. For now, though, our protagonist decides to follow that assumption. Grabbing his backpack, he tells Azel that he passed the test. Ronan casually tosses him a bag and insists that he join him. When Azel questions what exactly they are planning to do so late at night, our protagonist simply tells him to follow along, because this might become the opening line of his biography in future history books. While traveling together, Azel eventually learns about Ronan's plan to enroll in the Imperial Academy. He immediately points out what we already know. The Academy is reserved for nobles and elites. Meanwhile, both of them are nothing more than commoners. Our protagonist clearly finds those remarks annoying before asking the real reason Azel is so hesitant about enrolling. The boy begins comparing the two of them, claiming that Ronan possesses incredible swordsmanship while he himself has no real talent. That is when Ronan cuts him off, stating that he is merely making excuses. Our protagonist asks whether Azel plans to continue living like this forever, wasting his life entertaining thugs. Sure, Azel is timid to the point where he almost looks cowardly. He is also a crybaby and a loser. Ronan's words land like critical hits because they are painfully accurate. Still, our protagonist notes that it is not too late for Azel to change, and if he truly wants to change, then it has to happen today. Otherwise, he will spend the rest of his life drowning in regret, just like Ronan did in his previous life. When Ronan asks whether he has changed his mind and wants to follow him to the academy, Azel finally realizes that our protagonist is genuinely worried about him. Ronan then explains that he has no intention of forcing him and that the choice is entirely his to make. As a result, Azel finally agrees to enroll in the academy alongside our protagonist. Hearing this, Ronan smiles, because after all, this had been his plan from the very beginning. Before moving on, however, our protagonist notes that they first need to do something about Azel's timid personality. The boy nervously agrees while Ronan reveals a wicked smile, as though everything is unfolding exactly according to his plan. Later, Azel looks like someone who is already regretting every life decision he has ever made. Almost in shock, he asks Ronan whether this is truly what he meant. Standing before them is their very first hurdle. Our protagonist nods confidently, explaining that this will be Asel's first opponent and the perfect chance to draw out his hidden abilities. Their target happens to be a lunar goblin that looks like it has never skipped a single day at the gym. And sure enough, there are several more of them nearby. Asel immediately turns pale, while our protagonist calmly reassures him that this will be a breeze. Our protagonist gives us some context about the lunar goblins, a type of goblin commonly found in this area. Unlike normal goblins, their yellow skin and disfigured bodies make them stand out. In addition, these goblins are obsessed with gold and treasure. So naturally, instead of raiding villages, they prefer attacking merchants. During every full moon, they gather everything they have stolen and hold a grand celebration. Perhaps that is why they are called lunar goblins. After the explanation, Azel begins to understand why they are here. Of course, they plan to steal from the goblins. However, Azel expresses surprise, stating that this is the first time he has ever heard of goblins holding festivals. Curious, he turns to our protagonist for answers. Our protagonist gives a simple response, while inwardly noting that everything he knows comes from his past life, where he encountered these same goblins in this exact location. And this is where Azel comes in. Ronan wants him to use his telekinesis magic to move the treasure into their backpacks. The poor guy immediately thinks the task sounds difficult and wonders what will happen if he accidentally wakes the goblins up. Our protagonist states the obvious, saying it would be really bad. Because of this, Azel refuses to do it, but Ronan points out that he is acting like a coward again. He then explains that two things are needed to enter the Imperial Academy. The first is obviously money to cover the insane tuition fees. The second is real-life combat experience. As we already know, the Academy is a place reserved for nobles and powerful aristocratic families, meaning most students there have received training since birth. Our protagonist explains that the only way commoners can stand equal to them, or perhaps even surpass them, is by gaining experience through risking their lives. So he concludes that the goblins are the perfect target, meaning they can earn money and gain experience at the same time, literally killing two birds with one stone. Since Azel clearly has no better ideas, our protagonist insists that he at least give it a try. Following Ronan's instructions, Azel slowly but steadily secures the treasure. Eventually, they manage to fill both bags with valuables. Meanwhile, Azel can hardly believe he actually pulled it off. Our protagonist thinks to himself that although Azel lacks confidence right now, he is certain the boy will improve quickly once he gets used to situations like this. In his eyes, he may have just found the perfect minion. Since they are done, our boy insists that they leave immediately. Azel expresses surprise that everything ended so smoothly, but our protagonist points out there was never much to do in the first place. Things should have ended peacefully, but suddenly loud noises echo from the forest. This causes our protagonist to wonder what kind of idiot would create such a ruckus in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, the noise wakes one of the goblins from its sleep. The moment it turns around and sees the treasure chest empty, it immediately alerts the rest of its companions. Just as the goblins begin wondering how the treasure chest became empty, one of them suddenly turns toward our protagonist's location. Unfortunately, they are caught red-handed, and both boys instantly realize that they are completely screwed. The goblins immediately charge toward our protagonist and Azel. Azel's heart practically drops, and he looks like his soul has already ascended. Contrary to him, Ronan calmly comments that he expected this to happen. Ronan prepares himself to fight, but Azel desperately insists that they abandon the gold and run away. Ronan flatly rejects the idea because this treasure is the only way a broke group of commoners like them can ever hope to afford the Imperial Academy. Now that the goblins are closing in while Azel continues panicking, our protagonist calmly observes his sword. Only now does he realize that the longsword he took from the bully is made from cheap steel. Regardless, our protagonist estimates that with the sword's weight and durability, it can probably withstand about 15 attacks at best, but there are 30 goblins in front of them, which means he needs to use every strike carefully. So the moment several goblins step within range, in one swift and clean motion, our protagonist effortlessly slices off the heads of 3 goblins at once. Meanwhile, Azel is left wide-eyed after witnessing the scene. And just like that, only 14 strikes remain. The next chapter begins with our protagonist killing the final goblin. Meanwhile, Azel is left in complete shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Not only did our protagonist casually cut off the heads of 3 goblins with ease, but when the remaining goblins rushed toward him, he moved in a flash before slicing off the head of the last goblin. Our protagonist snaps him out of his thoughts, causing Azel to quickly apologize for spacing out. However, our protagonist insists there is nothing to apologize for and suggests they head home instead. On the way back, Ronan begins experiencing muscle soreness, while Estelle can only complain inwardly about how heavy the bag is. Well, it is obvious he is still a teenager and still growing. Because of this, our protagonist plans to set aside some time to work out once he gets home. Just then, Azel asks about the shout they overheard earlier. Our protagonist thinks about it for a moment before admitting he has no idea who those crazy bastards were. Unbeknownst to them, someone is aiming an arrow at them. The first target is Azel, and just inches before the arrow could hit, our protagonist reacts instantly and catches it in time. Azel looks as though his life flashed before his eyes. In contrast, our protagonist is furious at these insane bastards. Meanwhile, the one responsible for firing the arrow, along with his companion, merely expresses shock that they almost hit someone, and children at that. That reaction alone only makes our protagonist even more furious. Still angry, our protagonist watches as the two men approach them while apologizing. Although they claim they mistook them for monsters, their eyes are far more focused on the bag filled with gold and treasure. Midway through their statement, Ronan cuts them off, pointing out that they are not even trying to hide their intentions. He then directly demands to know who the two bastards are. Both men can immediately tell our protagonist is far from a normal teenager. So one of them steps forward, pretending it was his fault for not introducing himself properly, while secretly pulling out a knife. In the very next second, he suddenly moves to kill our protagonist. However, our protagonist instantly grabs his hand and follows up with a direct punch to the face, causing the attacker to cough up blood. Seeing this, the man's partner immediately charges toward our protagonist from behind. Azel reacts at once and uses his telekinesis. The man freezes in place just inches away from striking our protagonist. Frustration quickly spreads across the attacker's face. Meanwhile, Ronan praises Azel, noting that he did a great job. Then he takes the man's blade and delivers several cuts across his body. The man cannot understand how our protagonist suddenly appeared behind him, but it is already too late for him to even demand an explanation. Azel reacts in horror after seeing the man cut into pieces. He even asks if the man is dead, and our protagonist calmly answers yes, explaining that he cannot spare anyone who comes after him. Not to mention, the men had identified themselves as the Caliboro right before attacking him. The Caliboro are a notorious criminal group involved in kidnapping, human trafficking, and countless other crimes. They are basically one of the Empire's most infamous poaching organizations. Ronan explains that if they had not killed those men, the criminals would have eventually harvested their organs and buried them somewhere deep in the forest. Of course, all of this is completely new information to Azel, and he even tries to argue against it. However, Ronan immediately calls him an idiot, pointing out that allowing people like that to live is a crime in itself. In the middle of their banter, something inside the sack suddenly catches their attention, causing both of them to react in shock as they wonder what could possibly be inside. Azel assumes it must be a poached animal, a notion our protagonist also agrees with. But the moment they open the sack, a bird suddenly flies out. Now, the group can only stare at the strange bird in confusion. Our protagonist points out the obvious, stating that the bird's feathers are blue. Azel replies, saying it is the first time he has ever seen a bird like this, making Ronan realize that, just like him, Azel is seeing this kind of bird for the first time. However, he soon notices that the bird is shackled. Ronan explains that it is a Caliboro shackle, an item that disrupts the flow of mana and restricts the movements of its captives. Normally, it is only rarely used, especially when it comes to capturing fantasy creatures. Just then, a magic circle suddenly appears behind the bird. A voice comes out from the circle, noting that the connection was successful. Azel reacts in fear, pointing out that the bird just talked. But our protagonist insists the boy calm down, explaining that someone is speaking to them through communication magic. He realizes this was only possible the moment the bird came out of the sack, meaning the sack must have some kind of barrier magic. The person on the other side explains the situation and introduces himself as the bird's guardian. The man expresses relief after finally getting through after so many failed attempts before politely asking our protagonist to introduce himself. Our protagonist explains that they were simply passing by when they encountered the people responsible for kidnapping the bird. However, he deliberately leaves out some details, especially the part about him killing the men. Anyways, our protagonist sums up the story by saying they saved the bird. The man on the other side of the communicator expresses shock and notes that he is indebted to Ronan and his friend. Our protagonist insists there is no need for repayment because he is only focused on helping the bird return to its owner. The speaker is in the middle of explaining the dream bird's instincts, but our protagonist has already swung his sword and destroyed the shackle. With that done, he suggests the dream bird head home. However, the dream bird suddenly turns toward Ronan. Misunderstanding the situation, Ronan becomes confused, so the speaker explains that the dream bird wants him to pluck one of its feathers. The speaker further explains that the feather acts like a tracker, allowing the dream bird to locate our protagonist in the future. After that, the speaker bids them farewell before the bird flies away. Ronan did not expect the dream bird to fly so fast, but Azel soon shifts his attention to what is in Ronan's hand. It seems the dream bird left behind a parting gift. However, neither of them has the slightest idea what it is. The next scene takes us a few days later. A merchant is appraising an item while praising its craftsmanship. He finds the item incredible and offers to pay 20 gold coins for it. Our protagonist explains that the man is Duan Carabel, the owner of the Carabel Merchant Guild. The man calls himself lucky for encountering such valuable and high-quality items. Hearing all this praise, our protagonist thinks the merchant really knows his stuff. For a while now, he had been arguing with other merchants who were trying to scam him by offering far less than the item's actual worth. The two shake hands, and Duan Carabel notes that it is an honor doing business with Ronan. As if on cue, our protagonist reaches into his pocket the moment the man asks if he has anything else to sell. Ronan explains that he does not plan on selling it, but is simply curious about the egg-shaped object. The egg just so happens to be the parting gift the dream bird gave him. At first, both he and Azel misunderstood it for something else, because it smelled awful. Thinking it was bird droppings, our furious protagonist tossed it away. But to their shock, the egg actually destroyed a boulder on impact. Now both of them are confused after witnessing such an outcome. The merchant begins observing the egg closely. Meanwhile, Ronan thinks to himself that even if it turns out to be some kind of waste product, it still came from a rare fantastical creature, so it should at least be worth something. After a close inspection, the merchant concludes that it is horse dung. However, he quickly reveals that he was joking because even he has absolutely no clue what the egg really is. Still, he suggests that our protagonist get it appraised at a place that specializes in unidentified objects. Ronan considers the suggestion since he was only curious and never intended to sell it in the first place, while Azel quietly chuckles to himself and keeps his thoughts hidden. Just then, our protagonist asks for something else. Apparently, they want books about the Imperial Academy because they plan on enrolling there. The merchant calls it a coincidence because his daughter is also an applicant and plans to attend the academy as well. As if on cue, the girl suddenly appears and demands to know who her father was talking to. Our protagonist turns to face her, while the merchant explains that she is Maria, his only daughter. For a brief moment, our protagonist is completely taken aback. From his reaction, it seems he knows something about her. Anyways, Maria's father explains that he was simply doing business with our protagonist. Her father becomes annoyed when the girl addresses his important client so rudely. Because of this, he immediately apologizes for her rough tone. But Azel insists it is not a problem. Azel was about to suggest to Ronan that now would be the perfect time to leave, but the guy suddenly comes face to face with Maria and demands to know if she is really Maria. The moment he mentions whether she has Sen as a middle name, she expresses surprise and naturally asks how he knows that. This causes our protagonist to become thoughtful as he states that she looks like someone he once knew. However, something still does not add up, so Ronan insists that Maria come closer. Now curious, she wonders what Ronan is trying to ask. He gestures awkwardly, trying to hint at something, but when she fails to understand, our protagonist bluntly asks whether she has a long sword. Of course, her reaction says it all. She has no idea what he is talking about, and even assumes Ronan is simply spouting nonsense. But seeing the way Ronan keeps staring down there as if he is trying to understand something, she slowly starts piecing things together, though she still feels completely lost. However, the moment Ronan casually comments that she does not have one, Maria finally understands what he means and instantly becomes furious. As a result, Ronan gets brutally slapped across the face as Maria calls him a crazy bastard. Instead of feeling annoyed, our protagonist realizes the slap feels strangely familiar. Our protagonist rage baits her just to confirm whether she is the same Maria he knew from his past life. Ronan explains that she was a count in his previous life. Back when he was merely a common soldier in a place called Armorlin, she, or rather he at the time, was the one in charge of supplies. Her work ethic, combined with her easygoing personality, makes her friends with everyone. However, she always becomes furious whenever guys start talking about their long swords. And yes, our protagonist usually gets slapped by her whenever those kinds of discussions come up. In the end, she dies during the battle against the giants before he can ever find out why she hates such subjects so much. Well, now the answer is literally staring right in front of him. Just imagine discovering your close friend has actually been a girl the entire time. Meanwhile, Maria grows even more annoyed seeing our protagonist still smiling, and she is about to hit him again. But Ronan immediately smacks her on the head instead. As a result, she becomes even more furious and responds with a headbutt straight to Ronan's chin. And just like that, the two of them begin fighting, leaving both the girl's father and Azel completely speechless. We skip forward a few moments later. Inside the tent, Azel is left momentarily stunned by what he is seeing. Just moments ago, Maria and Ronan were going at each other like they were about to kill one another. But now, the two of them are getting along as though the fight never even happened in the first place. Anyways, they begin discussing swords and a magic wand. When Maria wonders why Ronan needs 3 swords, especially since they would be heavy to carry, he explains that he uses swords differently. Hearing his explanation, Maria suggests he use a black iron sword. Black iron is incredibly sturdy, and is a weapon many renowned knights desperately crave. She is certain our protagonist would never break it, no matter how hard he tries, something Ronan silently confirms, because this is the exact type of sword he used in his previous life. Maria then shifts her attention toward the magic wand and asks Azel if he is really a mage. He confirms it and reveals that he is a telekinesis-type mage. Of course, Maria is shocked. She explains that with talent like that alone, he could easily secure a scholarship. Now, she turns toward our protagonist. Apparently, the practical exam is different for them, because they need to demonstrate their techniques. She is surprised Ronan does not know this already. So Maria explains that the practical exam is essentially a stage where candidates attempt to impress the professors with their skills. Furthermore, she highlights that there are 2 exams in total. The theory exam is somewhat difficult, but nowhere near as difficult as the practicals. From her explanation, Ronan understands that passing the practical exam is basically the key requirement for enrolling in the academy. Normally, for swordsmen like them, most noble candidates showcase their family's secret techniques. However, our protagonist suddenly stops her the moment she casually mentions mana, as though it were something basic. Her eyes widen when Ronan asks if kids their age can already use mana, even if they are not mages. After giving a brief explanation about mana and how sensing it is a basic requirement, she suddenly pauses mid-sentence as she realizes from Ronan's expression that this is completely new information to him. Now she is even more shocked that our protagonist cannot even sense mana. Worse yet, Ronan asks whether mana and aura are somehow similar. Maria honestly feels helpless, just thinking about how someone like Ronan seriously wants to enter the Imperial Academy. As a result, she suggests that our protagonist follow her outside, which immediately catches him off guard. She also asks to borrow his swords. Our protagonist instantly warns her not to damage them. Maria reassures him, stating that if she damages even 1 sword, she will compensate him with 3 new ones. With that, she seriously insists that Ronan follow her because she wants to give him special training. Before we proceed, mana is explained as the root source of natural power. The simplest way to imagine it is like air itself. However, that does not mean everyone has access to it. Before someone can perceive mana, they first need to sense the mana within themselves. To reach this stage, training, innate talent, and various other factors all come into play. Furthermore, it usually takes at least a year of brutal training before someone can finally unlock mana sense. Now, candidates who wish to enter the academy have already passed this stage, meaning they only enroll after unlocking and mastering their mana techniques. To summarize, it is incredibly difficult for someone like Ronan to enter the academy. And Maria adds that he does not even know the difference between aura and mana, yet he still dreams of entering the academy. Eventually, she explains that aura is a type of mana, but the gap between the two is like the distance between heaven and earth. While it takes a minimum of 1 year to unlock mana sense, aura requires over 10 years of insane effort. And even then, very few people manage to obtain this innate power. Come to think of it, our protagonist has actually met aura users in his previous life. Although they are incredibly strong, they still die in the end. Maria pulls him from his thoughts, believing Ronan will learn far faster through practice rather than explanations. Ronan does not expect much from Maria's younger self. But in the very next second, With a single dash, she appears right in front of him. Recovering from the shock, he immediately blocks her sword strike. Still, he is not that surprised. Ronan pushes Maria back with a single swing of his longsword. In his mind, he is genuinely surprised that Maria's younger self can exert such tremendous force, especially as a dual sword user. Since he cannot see or sense mana, he wonders if this is some kind of mana technique. Meanwhile, Maria herself cannot understand what is happening. She had been certain she could end everything in a single strike. After all, she is seriously using mana in this fight. Her goal was simple: force our protagonist to willingly surrender and avoid humiliating himself during the exam. Yet despite using mana, she is the one being pushed back by Ronan, who is not even relying on mana at all. Noticing her hesitation, Ronan suddenly asks why she seems distracted. Before she can respond, he shatters her guard with another swing of his longsword. Our protagonist may not be able to use mana, but his battle sense is exceptional. Bringing his sword down again, he calmly advises Maria to dodge instead of trying to block the attack. Fortunately, she steps back just in time, her eyes widening in shock at the sheer power behind the strike, immediately creating distance. She mutters that something terrible would have happened if she had hesitated even a little longer. At this point, she can confidently tell that Ronan is far from normal. To that, our protagonist casually replies that she is the same. After exchanging compliments, Ronan suggests that she fix her center of gravity, explaining that it would greatly improve her movements. Maria flies into a rage when she realizes the protagonist is walking away, under the impression he's already won. Ronan completely ignores her tantrum, and instead reminds her to keep her promise about the sword. She is about to ask what he is even talking about when her sword suddenly shatters like glass. The girl is left completely stunned, wondering when it even happened. Ronan ignores the question and simply insists that she pay for the sword. Just then, Azel approaches from behind. He praises Maria for doing a good job, admitting that he can somewhat understand how she feels right now. Afterward, he joins Ronan, leaving Maria behind as she wonders about the true identities of the two boys. The following day, Ronan arrives to collect his money, only to be stunned by what he sees. Maria did not merely pay for the damaged sword. She also prepared books and study materials overnight regarding the Imperial Academy. Seeing the blank expression on our protagonist's face, she wonders if he does not need them, especially since there is only 1 month left before the entrance exam begins. Ronan notes her for the thoughtful gesture, but asks why she went so far for them. He even suspects that Maria might be plotting something, but she reassures him that he is simply overthinking things. According to her, she is only doing everything she can to ensure all of them pass the exam, which is why she is giving the materials away for free. Unfortunately, they are about to leave, so Maria tells Ronan to study hard because if he fails the entrance exam, she will never let him off. Hearing her concern, Ronan simply tells her to take care of herself as well, and just like that, they part ways. Maria hopes they will meet again at the capital during the entrance exam. Azel waves goodbye while Ronan sinks into deep thought. He understands his limitations. His body is still weak, and he has never been someone fond of studying. Even so, the feeling is not unpleasant. In fact, he finds himself excited to begin right away. From that point onward, Ronan's life turns into a strict routine. Every morning he eats as much as he possibly can. Even his sister is shocked by the absurd amount of food he consumes. Those calories later become fuel for building his stamina and strength. And by building strength, our protagonist is literally hunting monsters non-stop, to the point that there are barely any monsters left near his hometown. Of course, he cannot neglect studying either. Ronan constantly complains, especially when wondering why he even needs to learn the dining etiquette of the North. Regardless, an entire month soon passes. And now, we shift to the main part of the story, the capital city of the Kingdom of Valen. As we already know, the Imperial Academy is located in the very center of the capital, within the White Tower district, a city within a city. Meanwhile, Azel acts like a complete country bumpkin, openly admiring the capital and calling it a masterpiece. Ronan cuts him off, asking why he is standing in the middle of the street instead of moving. He insists they hurry before they end up late for the exam. Azel quickly starts apologizing but suddenly stops mid-sentence. Only a month has passed, yet Ronan has somehow grown significantly bigger. Naturally, Azel asks how our protagonist managed to grow so much in such a short time. Judging from Ronan's reaction, however, this is clearly not the first time Azel has asked the question. Lightly smacking him, Ronan tells him to stop wasting time and keep moving. At the same time, Ronan wonders if he might finally meet that person. The person in question is the future sword saint, Schlieffen, a descendant of the prestigious Grancia family. Schlieffen is regarded as a genius and the strongest youth in the capital. Since they are roughly the same age, there is a high chance Ronan could encounter him. Just then, Azel suddenly asks Ronan if he remembered to bring that thing. Confused, Ronan asks what he means. Azel explains that he is referring to the feather given to him by the dream bird. Apparently the feather can guide them to the bird's owner. Ronan pulls out the blue feather, admitting that he only brought it because he suspected the owner might be living in the capital. Almost immediately, the feather begins reacting, pointing toward the highest floor of the academy. Meanwhile, on that very floor, the owner of the dream bird admits that he still has not gotten used to being a professor. He even wonders if he should have remained a researcher instead. Nonetheless, he knows he still owes a favor to the person who saved his bird. The man is Varin Fanashir, a Werelian and a professor of zoology at the Imperial Academy. Professor Varin approaches the window to let fresh air into the room while expecting to eventually meet the person who saved his bird. But the moment he opens the window, he is greeted by Ronan's ominous face staring directly at him. Both the dream bird and Professor Varin instantly freeze in place. After letting out an ear-piercing scream, Professor Varin demands to know the identities of our protagonist and his friend. Not to mention, they had entered through the very top window of the building. Ronan ignores him, thinking the professor's scream might have deafened him, while Azel points out that this is exactly why he insisted they use the stairway instead. Seeing the professor still anxious and repeatedly asking if they came for his bird, Ronan calmly shows him the blue feather. That is when Professor Varin Fanashir realizes they are the ones who saved his bird. Now seated, the professor begins by apologizing for his earlier outburst, which our protagonist simply brushes off as nothing serious. Azel cannot believe Ronan is blaming the professor's reaction on him when he was only following Ronan's instructions in the first place. Ronan insists that the boy remain silent when adults are talking. Anyways, Ronan expresses surprise. He never imagined the owner of the dream bird would be a Werelian and also a professor at the academy. Professor Varin mirrors his tone, noting that if he had known beforehand that Ronan was an applicant about to take the entrance exam, he would have written him a recommendation letter. Unfortunately, nothing can be done about it since the exam starts today. Still, Ronan does not seem concerned. Instead, he is far more interested in the egg Professor Varin's bird, Marpez, laid before returning to the professor. Seeing it up close, Professor Varin becomes Captain Obvious, stating that it is an egg from a dream bird. Ronan does not understand why the professor is so excited about this. Since it is an egg, it should obviously hatch. Still, Professor Varin Fanashir admits that he has no idea what the egg will hatch into, leaving our protagonist speechless. Ronan reasons that since the egg came from a dream bird, it should naturally hatch into another dream bird. Hearing this, Professor Varin shakes his head. He explains that depending on the environment, the egg of a dream bird absorbs the surrounding mana. Meaning, if exposed to flame mana, it could hatch into a phoenix. In a monster nest, it could take the form of the dominant monster nearby. In summary, these conditions prevent it from simply taking the form of an ordinary bird. The professor can analyze the mana coming from the egg, but even that is not enough to identify what it will hatch into. Regardless, he tells our protagonist that the egg is emitting a myriad of mana, like smelting molten metal running rampant. Our protagonist never expected to sit through a full lecture about an egg. He calls the bird shameless for laying an egg on his palm, without warning him first. Ronan becomes puzzled when the professor suggests that he keep the egg. Our protagonist can already tell the egg is something precious after the professor's explanation. However, Professor Varin notes with a saddened expression that a dream bird lays only one egg in its entire lifetime. So the fact that the bird gave the egg to Ronan means it sensed something special about him. Professor Varin is willing to do this because he trusts the bird, which he has known for a very long time. Hearing this, Ronan decides to keep the egg, mostly because he has become curious about what it will eventually hatch into. The group is about to leave for the exam when Professor Varin suddenly asks them to wait a moment before rushing off to retrieve something. It turns out to be instructions on how Ronan can hatch the egg. And just like that, the next scene takes us to the practical testing hall. This place is reserved only for swordsmen and other martial artist candidates. Just then, the examiner calls for the 112th candidate to take the exam. The door opens, and the boy enters to see the professors waiting inside. Ronan notices this and realizes his turn is up next. Still, he cannot help but complain about how long the waiting has taken. Unsurprisingly, Maria sits beside him and points out that this is apparently normal during the Imperial Academy entrance exams. When our protagonist wonders why she is so dressed up, she reminds him that she is a merchant. So since the candidates are mostly rich nobles, she has basically turned herself into a walking, talking advertisement for her father's company. Finally, it is our protagonist's turn as the examiner calls his number. Ronan approaches the door while Maria teasingly reminds him not to fail. Ronan simply thanks her for the support before adding that he will be back soon. After entering the testing area, Ronan locks eyes with the judges. They are all top professors of Philion Academy, so naturally every single one of them is an extraordinary individual. The old man seated in the middle is the headmaster and Archmage Krava Kratir. The woman sitting beside him is the sword instructor and Grand Sword Saint Nabarose. Ronan immediately introduces himself respectfully, and the headmaster notes that it is good to see him. He then tells Ronan to demonstrate his technique using the magically engineered dummy. Hearing this, Ronan thinks the test will be easy, so he casually declares that he will simply make one fast cut. The Archmage is stunned when Ronan claims that should be enough, especially since he intends to do it without even using mana. This causes the two professors seated to the left of the headmaster to begin discussing Ronan among themselves. One points out that he just said something foolish, while the other remarks that it is normal considering his outfit makes him look like someone from the countryside. The reason for their criticism is because Ronan clearly does not understand the dummy's powerful defenses and regenerative abilities. As a result, they begin whispering, mocking him and making fun of him, since even the genius from the Grantia family failed to leave a mark on the dummy. The headmaster dislikes the way his companions are mocking our protagonist. Instead, he wonders what they will do once Ronan proves them wrong. As if on cue, the old man suddenly becomes stunned. Just from Ronan's stance alone, he can already tell that the boy is the real deal. In that instant, our protagonist delivers a clean and incredibly fast cut to the dummy. His movement is so sharp and precise that it immediately catches the attention of the Grand Sword Saint. Seeing their stunned reactions, our protagonist calmly points out that he is finished. However, the two foolish professors still do not know what to make of such a cheap and seemingly simple performance. One of them even manages to maintain his mocking expression. But he immediately pauses after noticing the principal's expression. Suddenly, Nabaros rises from her seat and charges straight toward Ronan. Ronan sees the attack coming but chooses not to react, as Nabaros stops her sword mere inches from his neck. When our protagonist questions the sudden attack, she coldly demands that he explain himself, especially who taught him that swordsmanship. Ronan immediately asks what she means, prompting her to rephrase the question. Instructor Nabarosi asks if Ronan saw her movements just now, and he nods, admitting that she was impressive. Apparently, she did not simply dash straight at him. She had swung her sword 3 times within a single second. Instructor Nabarose agrees with his assessment, but points out that Ronan had done the exact same thing, and that is precisely what is making her furious. She asks Ronan if he thinks he can deceive her, because from her perspective, he intentionally made only 2 quick cuts before deliberately slowing down the final slash so everyone could see it. To her, it looks as though he was making fools out of them all. The headmaster simply sits there silently, as if he wants no involvement in something he might later regret. The previously arrogant professors also remain quiet. In Ronan's mind, however, the instructor is deeply misunderstanding the situation. The only reason he slowed down the final slash was to adjust his strength because he was worried about breaking his sword. But if he explains that misunderstanding to the professor, anyone can guess what would happen next. Nonetheless, Instructor Nabaros leaves after adding that she will remember his face. Our protagonist is left stunned and confused as she coldly swears that she will personally teach him swordsmanship. The headmaster mirrors Ronan's expression, silently wondering what Nabaros meant by teaching him personally. He even begins to wonder if she intends to make Ronan her disciple. Because of that, the headmaster decides to pay close attention to Ronan while telling him that he did a great job. Usually after the test, they ask a simple question. The answer does not have to be direct, so applicants are free to express themselves however they like. Thus, he asks Ronan what he wishes to learn once he enrolls in the academy. Ronan ponders for a moment before finally answering. After thinking briefly, he declares that he wants to learn how to live without regrets. Of course, the headmaster is stunned by his response. With that, Ronan is dismissed and leaves the testing hall. Meanwhile, the headmaster continues reflecting on Ronan's answer. His expression leaves the foolish professors confused about why everyone is acting so strangely. First, it was instructor Nabarose and now the headmaster. When they ask if there was something special about what Ronan did, the headmaster does not respond. Instead, he simply looks toward the magically engineered dummy. Now, the two foolish professors are left in complete shock. What even the sword genius failed to leave a mark on is cut cleanly apart by Ronan. Now they finally understand the sword saints and the headmaster's behavior toward him. Speaking of Ronan, he hasn't left the professor's testing area. As he reflects on his encounter with Nabarosi, he recalls how she seemed to come straight at him. Yet even now, he still wonders whether, in his previous life, he would have been able to go up against someone like her. Ronan admits to himself that he once believed he had seen his fair share of hardships, but encountering the Sword Saint makes him realize that he still has a long way to go. That thought immediately reminds him of the Grand Commander. As he leaves, he concludes that she was right, and that coming to the Imperial Academy was indeed the correct decision. Now comes the written test. Our protagonist believes it will be a breeze since he has been reading Murray's materials non-stop. But immediately after the written exam, our protagonist realizes that he is completely screwed. Both Azel and Maria notice his expression and are left speechless. Maria explains in disbelief that the fact Ronan could not answer even half of the questions is unbelievable, especially considering that every single question came directly from the materials she gave him. That is when Azel explains that Ronan had apparently forgotten his backpack after gathering the materials. Now Maria is left gritting her teeth in anger, wondering if this should qualify as a record for the stupidest person alive. Regardless, she insists that our protagonists cheer up because the practical exams carry far more importance than the written exams. Just then, a magic circle appears. One candidate points out that they are about to announce the rankings. A list containing the names of all the candidates who passed immediately appears in the air. Although there are many names, Azel and Maria eventually spot theirs on the list. Of course, that means both of them passed. Maria cannot believe that Azel ranked first in the theory exam for mages. Although the list also shows that two other people tied for first place with him, Maria still proudly declares that her cute Azel is amazing, while he shyly explains that he simply got lucky. Finally, the group turns toward Ronan. His expression says it all. It is obvious that he failed to make the list. However, both of his friends find that impossible. After all, they know just how strong he is. A furious Maria insists that he open his eyes and check again, only for Ronan to explain that he has already checked twice. Suddenly, a phoenix descends from the sky, immediately capturing the attention of every candidate present. When Ronan asks about the flashy display, Maria explains that it is apparently reserved for each department's salutatorian and is delivered through the Glory Phoenix. The bird instantly releases blazing flames. Our protagonist simply stands there like an idiot as one of the flames heads directly toward him. After the same dramatic display, everyone is shocked to discover that our protagonist is the salutatorian of the martial arts department. He ranked first in the practical exam while simultaneously ranking dead last in the theory exam. Of course, that means he passed the exam after all. Maria teasingly comments on the irony of him ranking dead last in the written exam while taking first place in the practicals. Ronan expresses relief upon hearing this, but his mood immediately changes. Because if he took first place, that means the person who was supposed to become salutatorian lost to him. Predictably, the person who took second place begins approaching Ronan, causing him to freeze as he already imagines the guy is definitely going to cause trouble. The boy in question happens to be the future sword saint, Schlieffen, the genius swordsman of the capital. So yes, things are about to get messy. Anyways, some of the candidates express shock upon seeing the Empire's rising star. Maria notices this and assumes Schlieffen has come over to chat, while Ronan immediately thinks this is going to be troublesome. He explains that Schlieffen is the type of person who absolutely cannot stand anyone surpassing him in swordsmanship. Trying to avoid the situation, Ronan claims he has no idea what the guy is talking about. Schlieffen can tell he is lying. Demanding an explanation, he questions Ronan, but Ronan simply shrugs, still insisting he has no idea what he means and telling him to leave. Gripping his sword, Schlieffen seems to make up his mind. In the next second, he attacks Ronan, but Ronan blocks just in time. Our protagonist is caught off guard by the sudden strike, causing both of his friends to express concern. Schlieffen then points out that if Ronan truly was not the salutatorian, how did he react instantly to the attack? Now the rest of the candidates realize what is happening and predict that a fight is about to break out. Sure enough, Schlieffen insists that Ronan stop holding back, while Ronan curses him as a crazy bastard. Since that is what he wants, Ronan tells him he will come at him with everything he has. And just like that, the fight begins. Ronan's 3 slashes are blocked by Schlieffen with a single swing of his sword. However, Ronan does not follow up. It is obvious. Schlieffen is shaken by the attack, causing Ronan to ask if he is satisfied now. At that moment, Schlieffen finally understands why Ronan took first place before suddenly launching another attack. Ronan blocks again as Schlieffen declares that this still is not enough. Ronan thinks the boy has completely lost his mind, while Schlieffen continues demanding that he reveal everything he has instead of hiding his true strength, grinding his teeth during the clash. Ronan explains that this is exactly why he never wanted to encounter this fool. At the rate things are escalating, Ronan realizes Schlieffen might soon begin manipulating aura. His aura technique, Tempest Sword, is a technique capable of creating violent tempests from a single slash. Ronan notes that he cannot handle such power at his current level. As a result, he quickly changes tactics. Thinking Ronan is trying to flee, Schlieffen becomes furious. He charges forward, and at the same time, Ronan attempts to use Azel as a shield. Azel is naturally shocked and wonders why it has to be him of all people. Meanwhile, Schlieffen becomes enraged, calling Ronan a coward. Mistaking Azel for a girl, he demands to know if Ronan can even call himself a knight. However, Azel immediately corrects him, stating that he is actually a guy. Apparently, this was all part of Ronan's plan. Since Schlieffen loves playing the hero, he would naturally try to protect the weak. Ronan seizes that opportunity and punches him straight in the face. Before Schlieffen can recover, Ronan immediately grabs both of his friends and runs off, leaving the stunned swordsman behind. Just then, a group of people finally arrives, apparently only showing up after the fight is already over. However, the moment the bald man sets his eyes on Schlieffen, he becomes startled and demands to know who dared strike his lord. In response, Schlieffen dismisses the remark and reminds them to speak informally to him because he entered the academy as a commoner, not as a member of the Grancia family. Furthermore, he explains that there is no need to go after Ronan since it was a fair fight. He is about to continue speaking when something else catches his attention. Schlieffen expresses shock after noticing that Ronan actually cracked his sword, a blade forged from the highest grade mithril. At first, he thought Ronan was nothing special, but to think he managed to do this much while wielding an inferior sword is truly impressive. Now Schlieffen becomes genuinely interested in Ronan and promises to remember his name. The following day, we are taken to the outskirts of the capital city, inside the Shimo forest. Ronan and the unfortunate Azel wander through the forest with a map, searching for their destination. Just then, Azel asks Ronan something, though Ronan does not immediately understand. Apparently, it concerns the events of the previous day. Azel discovered that Schlieffen belongs to the prestigious Grancia family, a family second only to the imperial household itself. Naturally, he fears retaliation. However, Ronan points out that he is simply overthinking things. He explains that although Schlieffen is a sword-crazed maniac, he is actually a good person who upholds principles and values trust. In many ways, he is the very image of the perfect knightly noble. Ronan also assures Azel that Schlieffen will likely treat their clash as nothing more than a sparring match. Otherwise, both of them would already be behind bars. After thinking over Ronan's reasoning, Azel admits that it makes sense. More importantly, they finally arrive at their destination, a mana vein, exactly where Professor Varen's map led them. The location is known as Fernando Spring. Before they proceed further, it is explained that mana naturally drifts throughout the world and occasionally gathers into a single concentrated point, forming something like a magical puddle. This phenomenon is known as a mana vein. Because of it, the surrounding environment absorbs mana over time. A simple herb can transform into a high-grade medicinal plant, while an ordinary stone can become a mana stone. After hearing the explanation, Ronan notes that the value of a mana vein is enormous, which is why many people attempt to monopolize them. In other words, Professor Varen allowing them to use this place freely just to hatch the egg proves how unbelievably generous the man truly is. Azel also confirms that this is indeed a mana vein, explaining that it is his first time seeing mana concentrated so densely in one location. He even believes that with this amount of mana, he could cast spells far beyond his usual limits. In addition, the boy notices that the Dreambird egg is actively absorbing mana at an astonishing rate. He also remarks that Maria would have loved to see this place, though it is unfortunate she is currently busy at the Merchant Guild. Azel agrees, but suddenly becomes thoughtful. He asks Ronan if he does not find something strange. Remembering Professor Varen's explanation, Azel points out that if a mana vein exists here, then it should naturally attract countless fantastical creatures to the spring. Ronan immediately understands what Azel is implying. Throughout the entire time they have been there, they have not seen even the slightest trace of such creatures. At that moment, our protagonist realizes he has overlooked something and become far too relaxed. Azel does not understand why Ronan suddenly starts complaining. In response, Ronan simply warns him to stay alert, because somewhere nearby he can smell blood. And now he finally understands why no creatures are approaching the spring. Azel expresses confusion when Ronan mentions the smell of blood. In response, Ronan tells him that the same people have come to visit them again, and by the same people, he means the same group from the previous chapter. Suddenly, several attacks are launched in their direction. Ronan effortlessly blocks them, cutting every projectile out of the air. At the same time, something about the arrows feels familiar to him, especially after he takes a closer look at the arrowheads. To explain this, Ronan recalls his days as a soldier. One of his comrades addresses him as captain while asking for his opinion on the arrows. The man proudly explains that arrows like those are special and powerful enough to blow apart an orc's head. Ronan watches him boast as though he is performing on stage. The entire group bursts into laughter, while Ronan, slightly irritated, questions how the man can be so proud of using such methods to hunt monsters. In response, the soldier reveals that the people who used those arrows for illegal hunting were extremely successful. And those people just so happen to belong to the elite organization known as the Calaboro Bloodhounds. With that in mind, Ronan immediately concludes that the people attacking them now are also from Calaboro, but unlike the weaklings before, these are Bloodhound-ranked members. Realizing this, he heads deeper into the forest while warning Azel to hide if he does not want to get hurt. Before Azel can even ask what is happening, Ronan suddenly dashes into the forest with terrifying speed. Meanwhile, the group is left shocked that Ronan casually cut down their mana-infused arrows. Seeing him rush toward them with bloodlust in his eyes, one of the men immediately orders the others to scatter and attack him from different directions at once. As expected, Ronan acknowledges their quick judgment and teamwork, noting how different they are from the small fry he dealt with earlier. Knowing they will be troublesome opponents, Ronan suddenly stops and asks if they do not recognize one of their own allies. The entire group becomes confused. Seeing that he has successfully caught their attention, Ronan reveals a wicked yet satisfied smile. He then boldly declares that he is the youngest bloodhound from the Damus branch, also known as a Hayut. Naturally, the group doubts his claim. One of the men even becomes furious when Ronan casually asks if he does not believe him. Hearing the man throw a tantrum, Ronan confidently tells him to ask the wolves from their branch. He then warns the man not to assume everyone behaves like he does, mocking him further by calling him a feral dog. Of course, the man instantly loses his temper after hearing such insults from someone he sees as a mere child. As a result, he grabs Ronan and resorts to threats. Ronan calmly gestures that he meant no offense, casually reminding him that assaulting fellow members is forbidden before adding that fools like him never end well. Our protagonist is incredibly skilled at provoking people. One of the man's comrades quickly steps in, asking if he is really about to lose his cool because of a child. Not to mention, Ronan has already demonstrated knowledge about their rankings, something only actual members would know. Acting more reasonable, the man suggests calling their captain first for confirmation. He points out that if Ronan truly belongs to the Damus branch, causing trouble with him could create serious problems between branches. Almost as if on cue, a man suddenly approaches and questions why the group ignored his order to remain silent and stay on standby. Everyone turns toward him and immediately realizes it is the man of the hour, Vume, the wolf captain of the Demire branch. The man grabbing Ronan quickly lets him go. Seeing this as perfect timing, he immediately begins explaining the situation while Ronan silently analyzes everything around him. For the captain to be here personally, it means the entire group is gathered in one place. So when the captain asks if Ronan truly is a Hayut from the Damus branch, Ronan confidently confirms it. The captain finds it suspicious, especially since this territory belongs to their branch. That is when Ronan suddenly reveals a wide grin. He casually admits that he did not know this was their territory, because after all, he is not a Hayute. Before anyone can react, Ronan cuts down several men with a single slash. The remaining members are left completely stunned. Meanwhile, Ronan advances forward with the same terrifying smile, mocking them for how easily he deceived them. Then, without hesitation, he kills the captain. The poor man never even stood a chance. Now only one survivor remains. The sword in the man's hand suddenly feels unbearably small. Ronan turns toward him and questions where all his earlier arrogance has gone. His movements are so fast that the man does not even realize his fingers have already been severed. As the man screams in pain, Ronan mocks him for crying like a baby. Still, Ronan offers him a chance to survive. The man is shocked when Ronan orders him to draw a map showing every Calaboro branch location. Ronan coldly explains that if he refuses, there is no reason to keep him alive. The terrified man agrees, but nervously points out that he has no pen. Hearing that, Ronan wonders aloud if the man is stupid. It turns out that chopping off his fingers earlier was all part of the plan. Eventually, the man uses his own blood to finish drawing the map of every branch location. Ronan even praises him for being talented. With a pale face, the man shakily asks if Ronan will let him go now. In response, he is split cleanly in two. Of course, Ronan has no intention of sparing anyone who dared to try and kill him. The next chapter begins with Azel feeling sick, while Ronan tells him to stop overreacting, especially when he had already warned him beforehand. Azel can only apologize. Still, he admits the sight is shocking, as he never expected this to be the work of the Calaboro group. Ronan reminds him that this is exactly why he said letting the group live was a crime. Since they are already branded as criminals, Ronan reassures Azel that killing them would not bring any consequences. Still, Ronan notes something else. He doesn't know if he should tell Professor Varen. Unfortunately, the professor's dream bird was among the creatures killed by the Calaboro group. Just then, Ronan notices the dream bird egg starting to react. Ronan takes it out, and at the same time, Azel's pale face points towards something as he asks our protagonist about it. Both of them freeze as they watch the blood from the dead creatures begin flowing like droplets before them. Suddenly, it converges into some kind of wave. Azel immediately hides behind our protagonist, while Ronan prepares himself for whatever is coming. Suddenly, the dream bird egg reacts. To their shock, the egg begins absorbing the sea blood of all the creatures at an astonishing rate. Azel, as usual, asks Ronan what is happening, to which he replies that he doesn't know. Still, he admits that whatever is inside the egg will definitely be something extraordinary. Eventually, the egg finishes absorbing the blood. The group watches as the egg begins showing signs of hatching. Azel is stunned, while Ronan, on the other hand, has been eagerly waiting to see what is inside. The moment the hatching is complete, he expresses excitement, only to be immediately smacked in the face by the hatchling. The impact makes his nose begin to bleed, leaving him slightly furious. Now, the group observes the hatched creature. Neither of them can quite identify what the flying creature actually is. Ronan even wonders if his Pokémon is some kind of dragon with dream bird feathers. Still, he finds it very cute. Before long, he expresses annoyance that his familiar hit him in the face. In response, the Pokémon activates a magic spell and heals our protagonist's injuries in the process. Ronan is left slightly stunned, while Azel expresses admiration that the creature can even use healing magic. On top of that, it clearly likes Ronan. Hearing this, Ronan believes his Pokémon definitely possesses even more abilities. Just then, Azel suggests giving it a name, since they can't keep referring to it as his familiar. Our protagonist begins thinking of a suitable name when the creature suddenly senses something. The moment it locks eyes on its target, it immediately heads in that direction, leaving the group stunned. Unlike Azel's puzzled expression, Ronan realizes that his familiar has also sensed someone's presence. And the person in question happens to be Balruz, a remnant of the Demire branch of the Calaboro group. Balruz, in his thoughts, wonders what is happening. He had merely gone on an errand, only to return and discover that everyone was dead. Not to mention, he had seen our protagonist and Azel during the egg absorption process, so naturally he chose to run away. However, the moment he turns around, he shouts in terror as he realizes he is being chased. Because he isn't paying attention, he trips like a fool. To his shock, our protagonist's familiar begins feasting by visibly draining blood from his injury. The poor guy starts screaming and begging for help. That's when our protagonist steps forward, telling Sita to stop. Because if it continues any further, Balruz will eventually die. Meanwhile, Azel asks if our protagonist is really going with that name, to which he responds positively. Turning toward Balruz, he asks if he likes the name, leaving the man completely stunned as he begins thinking Ronan isn't normal. When Ronan asks if he is fine, Balruz immediately drops to his knees and expresses gratitude for saving him. However, he pauses before naturally asking our protagonist how he knows his name. Ronan doesn't reply. Instead, he places his sword against Balrus, making him break out into a cold sweat. It turns out our protagonist has met him before. When Ronan addresses Balrus as the talkative one of the Calaboro bloodhounds, Balrus quickly clarifies that he is only an errand boy, making our protagonist realize he has not yet risen to that position in this timeline. Still, Ronan presses him for information, making it clear that this is not a favor. Later that same day, our protagonist holds a few gold coins in his hand. He notes that the results have exceeded his expectations, and Azel beams beside him in agreement. Azel admits that he had been confused earlier when our protagonist kept collecting the spring water. At the time, he could not understand the reason behind it, but now that they are making such a huge profit, everything finally makes sense. With this, Azel happily declares that they no longer need to worry about money. Ronan agrees, though he adds that all of this is thanks to Professor Varen. Unfortunately, the Werelian is away on a business trip before they can thank him personally. Back in the past, Ronan had also given his old friend a mission involving the map he obtained from the group he killed. To make the poor guy carry out the task faster, our protagonist had intentionally instilled fear into him. Pulled from his thoughts, Azel asks Ronan what he plans to do with the money. As the second-ranked student, he already receives free tuition and academy funding, meaning he has no major expenses to worry about. Come to think of it, our protagonist pauses for a moment before commenting that there is actually something he wants to do, and it just so happens that the academy entrance ceremony is drawing near. A few days later, inside the capital, the driver opens the carriage door and announces that they have arrived at their destination. The mysterious passenger just happens to be Ronan's older sister. She steps out of the carriage in awe, marveling at the magnificent city surrounding her. Our protagonist approaches from behind, noting that the long trip must have exhausted her. When our boy asks if everything remained peaceful while he was away, his sister immediately fires back that she should be the one asking the questions instead. The other day, she had been completely shocked to see a high-class carriage parked in front of their house. So naturally, she demands to know how he managed to afford such a thing without any money. Without even waiting for an answer, she grabs our protagonist's face, worrying about how much weight he has lost while questioning whether he has been eating properly. Our boy reassures her that he has been eating well, bringing visible relief to her face. Just then, his sister notices Sita perched on our protagonist's shoulder and instantly finds the little creature adorable. The little guy politely responds as our boy introduces him as his new travel companion. Suddenly, our protagonist turns serious and urges his sister to hurry because time is short. She stares at him in confusion, wondering where they are rushing off to so suddenly. Taking her hand, our boy explains that once he enters the academy, he may no longer have the time, so there are several things he wants to do beforehand. The scene soon shifts to a luxurious boutique filled with grand arched windows. His sister freezes in shock, her eyes widening as she takes in the extravagant surroundings. The staff members stand attentively in the background, while our boy relaxes on a plush sofa, calmly watching his sister hesitate. Not long after, she emerges wearing a stunning dress while insisting that it feels far too expensive to accept as a gift. Our protagonist dismisses her concerns and simply gestures for the staff to bring out even more. Soon his sister can only gasp at the enormous mountain of gift boxes piled throughout the store. Meanwhile, our boy remains calm. He tells her that this is nothing compared to all the hardships she endured for him and claims that it is finally time for her to enjoy the rewards of his success. His words strike deeply. Ronan's sister covers her mouth as tears of joy and pride begin forming in her eyes. Being the dramatic queen that she is, our protagonist's sister loudly announces to the entire store that her little brother has suddenly become kind and completely changed his personality. Watching the siblings bicker, the staff quietly chuckles among themselves, noting how close the two truly are. Excited, his sister asks where they are heading next. Ronan explains that he needs to visit a workshop to repair his sword. He is just about to explain how the weapon was damaged when Schlieffen suddenly appears behind the door, asking if Ronan is finished yet. The sudden appearance startles Ronan, who immediately demands to know whether the guy has turned into some kind of stalker. Schlieffen calmly explains that he simply came to purchase a new sword. His aura leaks slightly as he insists that our protagonist should not misunderstand the situation. In response, our protagonist instantly gets fired up and calls him a crazy bastard. Just as the two seem moments away from clashing, Ronan's older sister quickly steps between them and scolds Ronan for using such foul language. Standing behind her, Schlieffen quietly listens as our protagonist gets thoroughly lectured. At the same time, he expresses surprise that Ronan actually has a sister. A moment later, she apologizes on behalf of her brother's foul mouth, and at that exact moment, the crazed sword maniac and future swordmaster witnesses something that completely changes his world. For the very first time, the guy realizes that there may actually be things even more exciting than swordplay. Like one of us hopeless fools, he falls in love at first sight. Seeing his stunned reaction, our protagonist's sister continues apologizing, which only surprises him further. Composing himself, Schlieffen quickly explains that he is actually the one at fault, meaning there is no reason for her to apologize. She immediately finds him extremely polite and kind. Now she sincerely hopes that someone like him can become friends with our protagonist. Meanwhile, our protagonist watches the entire exchange from the side with a completely speechless expression. Ronan becomes even more stunned when Schlieffen offers to compensate him for damaging his sword. Since he does not currently have money on him, Schlieffen instead hands over something unbelievably precious. The item, shaped like a compass, is the symbol of the Grancia family. The moment he sees it, Ronan reacts in complete shock, questioning whether the guy truly understands what he is casually handing out. However, Schlieffen barely pays attention because he is far more focused on Ronan's sister. Sure enough, he even recommends a blacksmith located at the western end of the street. Normally, commoners would struggle to gain entry there, but with the Grancia family symbol, it is practically a free pass. With that, he leaves while hoping Ronan makes good use of the sword. As for Ronan, he remains absolutely stunned. He explains that with the Grancia family's proof of identification, a person could practically purchase entire villages. This makes him seriously question whether Schlieffen is truly the future sword saint he once knew. Eventually, the day of the Imperial Academy entrance ceremony finally arrives. The headmaster addresses everyone, personally welcoming the freshmen of Class 787 while introducing himself as the Academy's headmaster. He delivers the usual speech, motivating the students to work hard, sharpen their skills, and earn their rightful place within the Academy. With their talent, combined with the instructors and the Academy's educational curriculum, he strongly believes that the students' names will one day be recorded in the history books. Throughout the entire speech, our protagonist feels completely exhausted. Meanwhile, his sister watches from afar, already on the verge of tears as she realizes that her little brother is truly among the students enrolling in the academy. Suddenly, the headmaster snaps his fingers. The new students stare in shock as what appears to be a massive crack forms across the sky itself. In the very next instant, all of them are teleported into a gigantic arena. The upperclassmen immediately erupt into loud cheers to welcome the newcomers. Ronan looks around in surprise, never expecting to be teleported so effortlessly, with nothing more than a snap of a finger. The headmaster's voice cuts through the noise, explaining that this marks the true highlight of the entrance ceremony as he encourages the freshmen to properly meet their seniors. The next chapter begins by giving us some context about the senior-junior meeting. As the name suggests, it is an event where the freshmen meet the second-year students, also known as the seniors. This process is always intense and is considered one of the most important events within the Imperial Academy. Since not every freshman is capable of fighting, the Academy automatically selects the first and second-ranked freshmen as representatives. They are then assigned to face one of the 4 top second-year students, with each duel involving martial arts. In the end, the entire event comes down to one-on-one spars between the representatives. As usual, the headmaster explains that this meeting is important not only for the students, but also for the instructors themselves. He further states that the duel is simply another form of the Imperial Academy's education system. Its purpose is to make students realize both their strengths and shortcomings so they can improve while also building relationships with one another. With that said, he tells the representatives to choose their opponents, adding that they are free to refuse the duel if they wish. Hearing this, Ronan inwardly thinks the headmaster is just beating around the bush and that the entire event is basically a sophisticated form of hazing the freshmen. The seniors are introduced one after another, and all 4 of them happen to be the top-ranking students of their year. One of the seniors immediately expresses his desire to fight the prestigious genius of the Grancia family, as well as the person who defeated him. However, our protagonist casually tells the guy to calm down. At the same time, Ronan also thinks about using this opportunity to prove himself to his sister so she will never have to worry about him again in the future. So when the headmaster announces the beginning of the event and instructs our protagonist to pick his opponent, Ronan suddenly raises his hand and states that he has a suggestion. The old man is left speechless when Ronan boldly declares that he wants to challenge all 4 seniors at once. Naturally, the expressions of the senior representatives immediately darken with anger. Meanwhile, Ronan simply wears a bright smile while insisting that they all come at him together. The entire arena falls silent after hearing his outrageous proposal. At the same time, the academy professors quietly move aside to discuss Ronan among themselves. Turning toward the Sword Saint, the headmaster asks what she thinks about our protagonist's suggestion. In response, she calmly tells them to proceed, explaining that Ronan's proposal actually aligns perfectly with the ideals of the Imperial Academy. She reminds everyone that victory in the duel is not what truly matters. After all, the headmaster himself once stated that the event exists to educate students about their limits while helping them build bonds with others. Only after she reassures the headmaster that she will personally intervene before anyone gets seriously hurt does he finally agree to proceed. Each of the seniors openly expresses their irritation. Karun believes our protagonist is looking down on them, while Irina assumes he is only acting this way because he ranked second in the entrance examination. However, Nazdo tells everyone to calm down. Although Ronan appears arrogant, Schlieffen is undeniably skilled, meaning they should avoid wasting too much energy fighting him recklessly. Meanwhile, our protagonist's sister grows anxious as she notices the sudden change in atmosphere. Screaming at the top of her lungs, she warns Ronan to be careful while reminding him that he can forfeit at any time. Ironically, that is the exact reason he challenged all of them in the first place, leaving his sister completely stunned. With both sides ready, the headmaster finally gives the signal to begin. Immediately, Nazdo rushes toward our protagonist in a flash while thrusting forward with his sword. Ronan effortlessly dodges the technique, which instantly reminds him of Moriah. From what he can tell, the seniors only seem slightly stronger than her. That realization makes him think he still has a chance to turn the situation around. However, there is one major problem. The seniors are attacking him with perfectly coordinated teamwork. Even so, Ronan inwardly praises their cooperation. Suddenly, Braum appears behind Ronan with his massive sword raised high above his head before bringing it down with overwhelming force. From our protagonist's perspective, the entire arena slows down. He can clearly see that their next coordinated attack is designed to end the fight in a single move. After all four of them are charging at him from different directions at the same time. In response, our protagonist suddenly disappears from sight. Braum's strike completely misses. The group is left stunned. Irina cannot understand how our protagonist suddenly appeared behind them. However, Ronan has already landed a strike during the confusion. Just when he assumes the match is over, he is shocked to see Braum still standing while glaring at him furiously. Since the massive senior dares to charge directly at him head-on, Ronan simply smiles and decides to end the fight in a special way. For a brief moment, the big guy freezes in shock, because our protagonist is low-key copying the Sword Saint herself. Just like her, Ronan moves while striking at the same time, instantly shattering the senior's massive sword in the process. With that, our protagonist calmly thanks them for the spar, admitting that he learned quite a lot from the fight. Seeing this unexpected result, the entire arena freezes in stunned amazement. Then, only moments later, the crowd erupts into loud cheers for our protagonist. Nobody could have imagined a freshman defeating 4 seniors at the same time. Although it feels humiliating, Nazdo admits to himself that he cannot even complain because the battle had been completely one-sided. Now, the only thing he can wonder is where such a monstrous genius even came from. Ronan glances toward his sister and realizes that after witnessing this display, she will definitely stop worrying about him in the future. Turning back toward the seniors, our protagonist once again compliments and thanks them for the fight. Naturally, Nazdo does not understand why he is being thanked. Still, Ronan continues expressing his gratitude, explaining that he simply got too excited after entering the academy, which is why he acted the way he did. He further adds that the seniors are far from weak. Instead, he sincerely appreciates them for accepting such an unreasonable request in the first place. Hearing this leaves the upperclassmen completely shocked. They clearly did not expect such humility from him. However, Braum suddenly bursts into laughter, admitting that they had completely misjudged our protagonist and initially assumed he was just arrogant. Without hesitation, the big guy grabs Ronan by the hand and insists that he should not act so humble after winning the duel so overwhelmingly. Just like that, Braum loudly declares our protagonist the true victor, stating that he possesses the qualities worthy of an Imperial Academy student. Once again, Ronan's older sister watches everything unfold in complete disbelief. She cannot help but wonder when exactly her once icy little brother developed such impressive social skills. Meanwhile, someone else is also quietly observing the scene from afar. That mysterious figure comments that Ronan is truly interesting. Later that same day, inside the Imperial Academy, a grand welcome banquet is held for the freshmen. Seeing the luxurious setting, Acel can barely hide his curiosity. Maria casually explains that it is only natural for the banquet to be this extravagant since this is the capital's Imperial Academy, an institution directly backed by the Imperial family itself. While eating, Acel suddenly turns toward Ronan and asks about his sister. Our protagonist explains that he ultimately had no choice but to send her back home because she would only continue worrying about him while he stayed at the academy. However, he secretly sent his pet dragon to follow and protect her, meaning there is no reason for him to worry. Acel comments that our protagonist is truly an amazing brother since he never jokes around when it comes to his sister's safety. Naturally, Ronan simply nods in agreement. Right at that moment, Schlieffen suddenly appears behind him. Of course, the instant our protagonist notices him, he immediately becomes furious. Ronan demands to know what the guy wants this time, only for Schlieffen to calmly reply that it is nothing important. The sword fanatic simply wants to know where Errol lives and how far the village is from the capital. He even pulls out notes while asking extremely specific questions regarding the exact route our protagonist's sister will take on her journey home. On top of that, he sincerely hopes Ronan hired a trustworthy mercenary group to escort and protect her. Having finally had enough of Schlieffen's endless questions, our protagonist roars in frustration while cursing at him. Unfortunately, Schlieffen completely misunderstands Ronan's last remark. The moment Ronan jokingly mentions a wyvern attack, Schlieffen immediately panics and desperately asks if that means the mercenaries and his sister could actually die. Meanwhile, our protagonist had only been speaking metaphorically, fully confident that she would remain safe no matter what. Yet Schlieffen is taking everything completely literally. So when Ronan finally asks why he is so interested in his sister and questions whether he plans to become her husband, Schlieffen instantly freezes like someone who had just been exposed. However, before he can awkwardly explain that he was merely concerned, another voice suddenly interrupts them. The newcomer calmly comments that she finds the entire scene extremely interesting. After all, she never imagined that the famous wolf of the Grancia family could be so talkative. The moment Schlieffen sees the figure, his expression immediately turns serious as he demands to know what she wants. The girl turns out to be one of the top-ranking freshmen from the mage department. Her name is Elizabeth Akalusha. With a polite smile, she tells Schlieffen not to misunderstand because the person she actually came to see is our protagonist. Naturally, Ronan looks confused. Meanwhile, Schlieffen senses something strange about her that he cannot quite explain. In the end, he concludes that the girl is probably up to something suspicious. Even so, he decides to leave her to her business. Before departing, Schlieffen almost suggests sending knights from the Grancia estate to protect Ronan's sister, but our protagonist immediately refuses and tells the love-struck idiot to get lost. At the same time, Acel quietly warns our protagonist to be careful around Elizabeth. He explains that she is extremely powerful and had completely destroyed her opponent during the senior-junior meeting. Hearing this, the girl calmly responds that those who bear claws must occasionally be taught a lesson. Ronan immediately tells her that he has absolutely no idea what she is talking about and insists that she get straight to the point. Smiling softly, Elizabeth comments that our protagonist is exceptionally talented, and that is precisely why she came to make him an offer. She reveals an object that resembles the Grancia family's proof of identification, though it is clearly different and belongs to her own family instead. With complete confidence, she waits for Ronan's response while noting that this is the kind of opportunity a mere commoner could only dream of receiving. What she offers Ronan is the Akalusius invitation. Unlike other noble families that prioritize bloodlines, Elizabeth's family focuses more on talented individuals. This is the very reason they became one of the two pillars of the empire. Interestingly enough, any commoner who receives one of these invitations is automatically adopted into the family. That is why it is called the invitation of Akalusius. Elizabeth observes our boy's reaction and can immediately tell he already knows the value of what he has just received. Our protagonist does not deny it. He explains that he once learned about it from someone, and that remark takes him far back into the past. During his time as a common soldier, he once saw the same invitation. The Grand Commander had explained that with it, even a simple commoner like herself could automatically become part of the Akalusha household. That was how she adopted the household name. To qualify, one has to pass a certain test given by the patriarch. For someone like our protagonist, she believes it would be easy. Apparently, Elizabeth's original plan was to make Ronan a member after he atoned for his sins through accomplishments in war, because she already knew from the start that Ronan was talented. Since our protagonist already understands the value of the invitation, Elizabeth sees no need to explain further. She turns to leave, but not before telling him that if a born beast mingles among sheep, given enough time, the beast will eventually become one of them. In other words, he should not waste time hesitating. Azel finally lets out the breath she had been holding after Elizabeth leaves, while Ronan remarks that people like her can simply do whatever they want. Still, it was not a bad outcome, because he now has a way to contact them. We already know that the Imperial Academy is a prestigious institution, backed by the Imperial family, boasting enormous resources and exceptional instructors. However, it is also explained that a student's grade determines the kind of environment they will live in. The dormitories are a perfect illustration of this. Nadia Hall is reserved for intermediate-ranked students. Although it is not luxurious, students there are treated as if they were boarding a second-class flight. On the other hand, Kratir Hall is reserved for the lowest-ranked students, making up nearly 30% of the academy population. As usual, the first day of assignment to this dorm begins with someone shouting in outrage. The guy points at the dorm and asks if they truly expect nobles to live in such a shabby place. The staff member remains composed. Clearly, this is not his first rodeo. He points out that he is not even a staff member assigned to Kratir Hall. Worse still, he reveals that 4 students are expected to share one room, and even the showers and bathrooms are communal. Ignoring their shocked expressions, he calmly explains that these are simply the academy's rules. However, if they remain entitled and refuse to work hard, they should prepare themselves to spend all their academy years in this shabby dormitory. Finally, we shift to the hall assigned to the top-ranking students, Nabardozer Hall. The room is nothing short of a high-end presidential suite. While exploring and admiring the room, our protagonist's eyes land on several documents placed neatly on the table. He quickly realizes they are class registration forms, something that had been explained to them earlier. He knows the importance of adjusting classes during the first year, and that taking too many classes is usually not the best choice. Even after knowing all of this, our protagonist still signs up for a huge number of classes. Well, since he is already at the academy, he might as well take full advantage of every class he wants. So the very next day, during his first class, our protagonist is confronted by a grim-looking, basic swordsmanship instructor who tells him that he cannot attend the class. Our protagonist looks genuinely confused. Seeing his panicked expression, the instructor casually reveals that he was only joking. However, he quickly clarifies that Ronan truly does not need to attend the class anymore, because he had already flawlessly demonstrated the Empire's basic swordsmanship technique. Based on academy rules, our protagonist will no longer attend the class, because he has already mastered and surpassed that level. Not to mention, his presence alone would only demotivate the rest of the students. The instructor happily tells him to move on, though he warns him not to get ahead of himself. However, later that day, our protagonist begins questioning what exactly is going on. Apparently, he effortlessly passed every class assigned to him that day with ease, meaning he would no longer need to attend any of them. Of course, this leaves Ronan extremely frustrated. Just then, someone approaches him in the middle of his tantrum. Ronan is surprised to see the Sword Saint herself. It turns out she overheard everything, and can already tell that Ronan completed all his classes in a single day. Ronan admits it and wonders aloud if this is truly how his academy life is going to be. Nabaruz listens to him while secretly thinking to herself that she never imagined a student could complete all their classes in a single day. However, she is not that surprised. In fact, she believes it is only natural for someone like Ronan, who copied her technique after seeing it just once. Remembering her previous remarks during the practical exam, she tells our protagonist that she cannot ignore his current situation any longer. Then, she orders Ronan to hand over his sword. Ronan complies, though he openly expresses his confusion. But in the very next moment, a blast shoots past him and explodes behind him. Apparently, the Sword Saint was merely testing his weapon, and that was all the sword could produce. She explains that Ronan's sword can barely even be called a weapon, and that it is only holding him back. Reaching for her own blade, she tells Ronan to watch carefully. With nothing more than a quick draw, the resulting power is several times greater than the previous attack, even though she used Ronan's sword. Returning her blade to its sheath, she asks Ronan if he finally understands what he is truly lacking. Apparently, the one thing he is lacking is a proper weapon. He had always considered weapons to be something expendable. However, that thought shatters the moment he witnesses the Sword Saint's swift strike. Even so, he tries to comprehend what she did. Our protagonist knows he used the very same sword strike, yet for some reason her power was far greater than his own. Instructor Nabarosi begins by saying that one breath and a handful of strength are meaningless concepts, especially in battle when someone's life is on the line. She also points out that even if Ronin is eventually able to use mana, it is essential for him to find a proper weapon. Obviously, this is something our protagonist understands well, considering he still cannot use mana himself. When Ronin asks how long she has known, she does not give a direct answer. Instead, she praises him for reaching this far, using nothing but his own physical strength. Still, she believes the day will come when he is finally able to use mana. And when that day arrives, he will need a weapon that truly suits him in order to use it properly. Suddenly, she tells Ronin to join her classes. Ronin is naturally shocked. She usually tutors only upperclassmen, but she explains that once our protagonist obtains a proper weapon, she is willing to make an exception for him. And just like that, Ronin and his friends find themselves standing in front of a shop. This place comes highly recommended by Schlieffen. Azel cannot believe that the run-down building before them is actually a forge. Maria agrees, pointing out that the structure looks so shabby it could collapse at any moment. Naturally, they begin to wonder if Ronin is certain they are in the right place. He confirms it without hesitation and insists they head inside. Maria wastes no time commenting that the interior somehow looks even worse than the exterior. Just as Ronin is about to lose his patience, a beastman suddenly appears, wondering why it has become so noisy. Standing before the kids, the werewolf demands to know their identities. Of course, Azel immediately begins to panic when the beast insists they state their business. Ronin does not answer right away because he is too stunned to see a werewolf working inside a forge. Growing irritated, the wolf asks if the children are deaf. Before he can continue, Ronin shows him the Grancia family's proof of identification and explains that they came to buy a sword. The wolf immediately realizes that he was sent by Schlieffen. However, he falls silent as he carefully inspects our protagonist and his friends. The wolf notices that every one of them, except Ronin, possesses mana. Our protagonist is stunned when the wolf questions the authenticity of the token, claiming that even if it is real, he does not care. Acting dismissive, the beast tells them to leave, assuming the information has somehow leaked out. That statement nearly gives Ronin a valid reason to snap. Suddenly, the wolf pauses as if he has remembered something. With a vicious grin, he reveals there is another way he could deal with them. Once again mistaking Azel for a girl, the wolf points at him and demands one of his arms as payment for entry. At this point, the poor guy looks ready to wet himself while desperately begging Ronin to do something. As a result, Ronin narrows his eyes and tells the werewolf that he has just crossed the line. Without hesitation, he thrusts his sword toward the wolf's chest, sending him flying back several meters. Ronin is not surprised to discover that the wolf is wearing invisible armor because he sensed it earlier. Staring furiously at the werewolf, he declares that his specialty is shattering things. Hearing this, the wolf finally cracks and admits that the whole thing was merely a test. When Ronin questions what he means, the werewolf explains that it is simply a protocol used to verify the skills of people they have never met before. The wolf shamelessly plays the victim, insisting he was only doing his job while also wanting to test his invisible armor. Seeing that our protagonist still doubts him, the werewolf further explains that it would be strange not to verify the identity of someone sent by the Grancia family, and if Ronin still does not believe him, he can simply ask Schlieffen himself. Even so, Ronin points out that the wolf nearly got himself killed. The werewolf awkwardly agrees, admitting that he may have gone a little overboard. Turning toward Azel, the werewolf suddenly puts on a bright smile and apologizes. However, even when the wolf insists that he does not eat people, Azel chooses to keep his distance. As expected, the werewolf has already left the poor boy traumatized. Regardless, the wolf finally introduces himself as Didikan, an apprentice at the forge and occasionally its gatekeeper. Since Ronin and his friends came looking for a weapon, Didikan decides to take them to the main forge. Once they enter an isolated room, the wolf activates a hidden mechanism and tells the children to prepare themselves mentally. To their surprise, the room turns out to be an elevator, and our protagonist along with his friends begin descending underground. Eventually, they arrive at the true forge, the Grand Carpadoki. Our protagonist is naturally amazed, wondering how anyone could build something this massive beneath the earth. Didikan tells him not to hold back his excitement because, after passing the test, he has decided to take full responsibility for them. In other words, he is not merely bringing Ronan and his group to the main forge. He is personally taking them to meet the greatest craftsman in the capital.